The strangest thing about inheriting 2,000 acres is realizing the most expensive thing on it might be somebody else's front door. I was standing under the stone entrance of Brookstone Ridge at 6:03 in the morning, holding my grandfather's deed in one hand and a fresh survey in the other, while a line of polished sport utility vehicles rolled past me like I was invisible. Their tires hissed over smooth black asphalt. A security camera clicked and turned from the top of a stone column. Landscape lights still glowed in the flower beds, even though the sun was already pushing gold over the pine line. Above the road, a bronze sign read Brookstone Ridge in letters so clean and confident you would think the ground beneath it had agreed to the whole arrangement. It had not. My name is Cole Whitaker, and 3 weeks earlier, I had buried my grandfather, signed probate papers, and become responsible for 2,000 acres of pine, pasture, creek bottom, and old fence line that had been in my family since the 1950s. I was still learning where he kept every key, every receipt, every handwritten note, when the surveyor called and said there was something I needed to see in person. That was how I ended up at the HOA's main entrance before breakfast, wearing work boots dusted with red clay, staring at a red boundary line on a map that ran directly under their right turn lane, through their flower bed, under one of their stone pillars, and across almost 140 feet of the road every homeowner used to get in and out. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I wanted to be reading it wrong. A mistake that big felt impossible because the entrance looked too permanent to be illegal. Stone pillars, bronze signage, cameras, irrigation heads ticking in the mulch, a weekend guard kiosk with tinted windows. People had wedding photos taken under that sign. Real estate agents used it in listings. The HOA newsletter called it the face of the community. But my grandfather's parcel map did not care how expensive the stonework looked. The county record did not care how many flowers they planted. The deed sat in my hand, soft at the folds and stamped with a truth older than every house behind that gate. The narrow strip beside County Road 22 belonged to Whitaker land. It always had. My grandfather had not sold it, donated it, or forgotten it. And from what I could see on that survey, Brookstone Ridge had built its entire front entrance on top of an assumption. A silver sedan slowed beside me, and the driver gave me the irritated look people give a utility worker blocking their morning routine. Behind him, the camera above the pillar adjusted again with a dry mechanical tick. That sound stuck with me. Tick, 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 like the gate itself was keeping time for a bill nobody knew was coming. I took pictures of everything. The north pillar, the south edge of the road, the sign, the camera pole, the irrigation box, the painted survey stakes my crew had placed before dawn. Then I looked past the entrance, down the private road where roofs and manicured lawns rose behind the trees, and I remembered something my grandfather once told me while repairing fence in July heat. Pretty does not mean paid for, Cole. And official does not mean owned. Back then, I thought he was talking about cattle auctions. That morning, standing under someone else's monument on my land, I understood exactly what he meant. My grandfather never called it an estate. He called it the land, plain and simple, like the word was heavy enough on its own. 2,000 acres sounds like a number that belongs in a sales brochure. But to him it was fence to mend, cedar to clear, calves to check, creek crossings to watch after a hard rain, and gates that had to be closed because open gates taught bad habits. He bought the first section in 1956, back when County Road 22 was still mostly gravel and Brookstone Ridge was nothing but pine shadows, rocky soil, and pasture grass that turned silver in the wind. Over the next 30 years, he added parcels whenever a neighbor retired, a family moved away, or a tax sale opened a door. He never bought fast, never borrowed more than he could sleep under, and never trusted a handshake unless the paper behind it matched. That was why every deed, tax receipt, survey note, and title letter ended up in the steel cabinet in his back office, sorted in folders with labels written in black marker. North Ridge, Creek Bottom, Timber Lease, Road Strip. He taught me to drive on those dirt roads before my feet reached the pedals right. I remember sitting beside him in his old green pickup, the vinyl seat cracked under my legs, the cab smelling like dust, coffee, and hay twine. He would point with 2 fingers on the steering wheel and tell me where one parcel ended and another began, not because he expected a 10-year-old to care about boundary law, but because he believed land forgotten by its own family was land already half lost. The narrow strip along County Road 22 was the one he talked about most. It was not the prettiest piece, not the biggest, not the part with the spring-fed pond or the tall pines. It was just a long, awkward strip of frontage, pinched between the road and the lower pasture, easy to overlook if you were the kind of person who only saw land in square lots and marketing phases. But my grandfather never overlooked it. He said frontage was leverage. Access was leverage. A gate was not just decoration. It was a sentence that told the world who had permission to enter. When developers first came sniffing around in the 1990s, they wanted that strip more than anything. Not the pasture, not the creek, the road strip. They offered to buy it, then lease it, then trade him for a wider piece deeper inside the property. He refused every time. Later, when the first Brookstone documents appeared, he let them use part of it temporarily for construction vehicles because the county wanted less heavy equipment turning on the shoulder. 90 days, written permission, no permanent rights. That was how he described it. Clear as a fence line. After he died, the house felt too quiet, and the land felt too large. I spent the first weeks sorting keys, bank papers, mineral leases, grazing records, and old envelopes that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. I thought I was just settling an estate. Then the surveyor's call came, and suddenly every lesson my grandfather had repeated in that old pickup came back with a different weight. The strip he refused to sell had not disappeared. It had been dressed up in stone, lights, cameras, and flowers, but underneath all of that, it was still his line in the dirt. Brookstone Ridge did not arrive all at once. It came the way subdivisions usually do, behind survey flags, temporary signs, and men in clean boots saying words like opportunity and responsible growth. I was in college when the first trees came down beyond County Road 22, and I remember my grandfather standing beside his mailbox, arms folded, watching dust rise through the pines where deer trails used to disappear. He did not curse. He just watched. That was how I knew he was angry. Within a year, the first model homes appeared on the ridge, all stone fronts, wide windows, and lawns so green they looked imported. Then came the entrance. 2 massive stone columns rose beside the road, followed by bronze letters, landscape beds, irrigation lines, uplights, and a little kiosk that made the whole place look less like a neighborhood and more like a resort trying to check your credit score. Brookstone Ridge sold privacy, views, and prestige. What it never sold was honesty about where its polished front door actually stood. Patricia Langford became HOA president sometime during the second phase, and from what I heard, she treated the title like a crown. Early 60s, pale suits, pearl earrings, perfect posture, and a voice that could turn a demand into something that sounded like civic duty. She called the entrance the face of the community. She called the landscaping a shared investment. She called the camera system a resident safety feature. She spoke in phrases that made everything sound voted on, insured, approved, and permanent. To most residents, it probably felt that way. They drove in under the bronze sign, waved at the weekend guard, admired the flower beds, and never once wondered whether the ground underneath had a different owner. Why would they? That was the dangerous part. Beautiful things make people stop asking ugly questions. My grandfather kept asking them. I found notes in his cabinet from those early years, copies of letters he sent to the original developer after construction crews started widening the shoulder near his frontage. He wrote plainly, "Permission for temporary construction access does not grant easement rights, signage rights, utility rights, or future access rights." He underlined temporary twice. The developer wrote back with soft language about cooperation and community transition. My grandfather wrote one sentence across the bottom of that letter in blue ink. Soft words do not move a boundary. I did not know any of that when Brookstone was being built. To me, it was just the fancy neighborhood across the road, the place with stone walls and homeowners who complained if dust from our pasture crossed the highway after a dry week. But after I inherited the land, Patricia's first letter arrived like she had been waiting for my grandfather's funeral to clear the calendar. It said my frontage created a negative impression near the main entrance. It mentioned tall grass, visible ranch equipment, old fencing, and the need for standard access cooperation documents. I stood in my kitchen reading it while the refrigerator hummed, and a stack of probate papers sat beside my coffee. She was not asking permission. She was trying to make my land sound like her maintenance problem. And the more I looked at the survey pins near that stone entrance, the more I realized her entire community had been built around the same mistake. Assuming a clean sign could make dirty title disappear. The first letter from Brookstone Ridge looked polite enough to fool someone in a hurry. Heavy paper, clean logo, neat margins, Patricia Langford's signature at the bottom in blue ink. It said my inherited frontage required attention to maintain community presentation near the main entrance. It asked me to cut the native grass along County Road 22, move my grandfather's old flatbed trailer out of view, repair the weathered fence line, and remove what it called non-conforming rural materials from the entrance corridor. Entrance corridor. I read that phrase twice at my kitchen table while morning light came through the blinds and dust floated above the probate folders. They were talking about my land like it was a hallway in their clubhouse. At the end of the letter, Patricia included a separate packet titled Standard Access Cooperation Documents. That was the part that made the air in the room feel thinner. The documents were written to sound harmless, all cooperation, continuity, and shared maintenance, but buried inside was language granting Brookstone Ridge permanent access, signage rights, utility maintenance rights, landscaping authority, camera placement, and limited control over improvements within the road frontage area. In plain English, they wanted me to sign away the problem they had built for themselves. I called the surveyor first. He came out that afternoon in a white pickup with orange stakes rattling in the bed, and we walked the strip while traffic rolled in and out of Brookstone behind us. Every few minutes, a resident slowed down to stare. The surveyor did not say much. He just set pins, checked measurements, and looked back and forth between his equipment and the stone pillars. The smell of hot asphalt rose under the sun. Water clicked through hidden irrigation heads in the flower beds, soaking mulch laid over soil my grandfather had refused to sell. The surveyor finally tapped his clipboard and said, "Cole, this is not a fence line issue. It is on you." I already knew, but hearing it out loud made the entrance seem different. The bronze sign looked less like a monument and more like evidence. 2 days later, I wrote Patricia back. I told her Whitaker land was not subject to Brookstone architectural standards. I had not granted authority for access structures, and before any discussion could continue, she needed to provide the recorded easement, purchase agreement, maintenance agreement, insurance coverage, and county approvals authorizing permanent HOA improvements on my parcel. I sent it certified. I kept the receipt. Her response came faster than I expected. She invited me to the Brookstone Clubhouse for a board meeting, wording it like a courtesy and not a summons. I went because my grandfather always said silence lets other people write the record. The clubhouse sat behind the entrance, all stone veneer and tall windows, smelling of lemon cleaner, coffee, and cold air conditioning. Patricia stood near the board table in a pale suit with pearl earrings and a folder tucked under one arm. She smiled when I walked in, but not with her eyes. Around her, residents sat in rows, whispering like I had come to threaten their morning commute. When my name came up, I asked the same question I had asked in writing. Where is the recorded easement? Patricia tilted her head and said the entrance had been openly maintained for years as part of settled community practice. A few people nodded. Someone muttered that I should be grateful Brookstone improved the area. Then Patricia looked directly at me and said old inheritance papers do not override reality, Mr. Whitaker. The room chuckled, soft and confident. I looked at the HOA attorney sitting beside her. He was not chuckling. He was looking at the survey I had placed on the table, especially the red line running under their stone pillar. That was when I understood the room had two realities in it. One was polished, expensive, and loud. The other was stamped by the county. After the meeting, I did not drive home right away. I sat in my truck outside the Brookstone Clubhouse with the engine off, listening to the muffled sound of residents leaving behind me and the steady tick of the cooling exhaust under the hood. Through the windshield, I could see the entrance lights glowing down the road, washing those stone pillars in warm gold like nothing in the world could touch them. That was what Brookstone sold so well. Permanence. Certainty. A feeling that if something looked expensive enough, it must have been approved by somebody important. Patricia understood that better than anyone. She had not argued the survey. She had not produced an easement. She had simply wrapped the problem in phrases people wanted to believe: settled community practice, shared investment, entrance corridor, continuity of access. The next morning, her second letter arrived by courier. Not mail. Courier. That was how I knew the board had finally become nervous. It said Brookstone Ridge expected immediate cooperation to avoid disruption to residents, delivery services, school transportation, emergency routes, and property values. It warned that any attempt to interfere with the main entrance could expose me to liability. It also repeated the request that I sign the access cooperation documents within 10 business days. I read it on my porch while a hawk circled over the lower pasture and the smell of cedar smoke drifted from a neighbor burning brush a mile away. They were trying to make me responsible for the chaos they had built on the wrong ground. I called a title attorney named Margaret Hensley, a woman my grandfather had used years earlier and once described as able to find a bad deed in a hurricane. Her office was in a brick building downtown, tucked between a bank and a feed supplier, and it smelled like paper, coffee, and old wood. I brought the survey, Patricia's letters, the probate documents, and the deed. Margaret listened without interrupting, then asked the only question that mattered. Did your grandfather keep the developer correspondence? I told her he kept everything. That evening, I went into his back office, unlocked the steel cabinet, and started pulling folders. Road strip, developer letters, Brookstone preliminary, construction access. The labels were written in his black marker, steady and square. Dust coated my fingers. The room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old envelopes. Outside, crickets scratched in the grass, and headlights from Brookstone slid through the trees every few minutes as residents passed over that strip without knowing whose land carried them home. At the bottom of the construction access folder, I found the letter. It was dated nearly 30 years earlier, addressed to the original developer, signed by my grandfather, and notarized at the county clerk's office. 90-day temporary construction access only. No sale. No permanent easement. No signage. No lighting. No utilities. No public entrance. No transfer of rights to future owners or associations. I read the last line 3 times because I could almost hear his voice in it. Permission expires unless renewed in writing by the landowner. There was no renewal behind it. No amendment. No recorded easement. Just years of assumption paved over one temporary favor. I scanned the letter, sent it to Margaret, and waited in the yellow light of that old office while the printer hummed behind me. Her reply came at 10:28 that night. Cole, do not sign anything. They do not have an entrance problem. They have a title problem. Margaret Hensley moved fast, but not loudly. By 9 the next morning, I was sitting across from her at a conference table while she spread my grandfather's letter, the new survey, Brookstone's access documents, and the county parcel map in a clean row under the fluorescent lights. She used a red pencil, not a highlighter, and every mark she made felt permanent. The north stone pillar crossed the Whitaker parcel line. The bronze sign sat partly inside it. The camera pole was fully inside it. The irrigation control box was inside it. The flower bed, the lighting conduit, and about 140 feet of asphalt were inside it too. She circled each one, then wrote one word in the margin, encroachment. I watched that word appear again and again until the entrance stopped looking like a gate and started looking like a stack of unpaid decisions. Margaret explained it in the calm voice of someone who had seen rich people make poor assumptions before. A temporary construction access letter does not become a permanent public entrance because nobody corrected it for 30 years. A landscaped road does not become HOA property because residents like using it. A camera does not gain legal authority because it is mounted on stone. She said Brookstone might try to argue reliance, community necessity, or imply permission, but my grandfather's letter was unusually clear. 90 days. No transfer. No future rights. Permission expires unless renewed in writing by the landowner. There was no renewal. There was only Patricia's confidence sitting on top of missing paperwork. I asked Margaret the question everyone would ask eventually. Could I close it? She looked at me over her glasses and said, legally, maybe. Strategically, do not. Not yet. Closing it would make me look like the source of the crisis. Making them prove their right to keep it open would show everyone who created the crisis. That was the difference between anger and leverage. So we built the response like a fence line, straight and hard to move. Margaret drafted a demand letter requesting proof of recorded easement, proof of purchase, proof of permanent access rights, proof of insurance coverage for structures on my parcel, maintenance records, board minutes, fee accounting, contractor records, camera vendor agreements, and preservation of all communications involving the entrance, the road strip, and my grandfather's temporary access letter. She attached the deed, the survey, the 90-day permission letter, the county tax map, and photographs I had taken at 6:03 under the stone pillars. No threats, no shouting, just facts arranged so tightly they did not need volume. When the letter went out, the sound of the office printer felt louder than it should have, a steady mechanical hum, like a storm door rattling before weather hits. By afternoon, Brookstone's attorney responded that the association disputed my interpretation but would review historical access materials. Historical access materials. That was what polished people called missing permission after someone found the file. The next day, Brookstone residents started noticing survey stakes near the entrance. Then someone posted a photo online asking why the main sign had red flags around it. Another person asked if the HOA actually owned the entrance. Patricia tried to calm everyone with a message about administrative clarification, but that phrase landed badly. People do not pay premium dues for clarification. They pay for certainty. And for the first time since Brookstone Ridge had been built, certainty had a red survey line running straight through it. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday evening, which told me everything I needed to know. People with clean records do not gather residents after dinner to explain a survey line. They send proof and go back to normal. I arrived at the Brookstone clubhouse with Margaret beside me, carrying a folder thick enough to change the temperature in the room. The parking lot was full. Luxury sport utility vehicles lined both sides of the curb, their polished paint reflecting the entrance lights down the road. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner, perfume, coffee, and nerves. Residents stood in little clusters, whispering over printed screenshots of the survey stakes, the county map, and Patricia's message about administrative clarification. The same people who had chuckled when she called my documents old inheritance papers were no longer amused. They wanted to know whether the road they used every morning sat on land the HOA did not own. They wanted to know whether their dues had been spent maintaining structures that might legally belong somewhere else. Most of all, they wanted to know why nobody had checked before Patricia made it sound like I was the problem. She stood at the front of the room in a pale suit, pearls shining at her ears, hands folded over a binder that probably had more tabs than answers. The HOA attorney sat to her left, looking like he had slept badly. When Patricia started, her voice was smooth but tight. She talked about long-standing access patterns, community reliance, good faith maintenance, and the importance of avoiding unnecessary alarm. Margaret waited until she finished, then asked one question in a voice so calm the whole room leaned toward it. "Where's the recorded easement?" Patricia looked at the attorney. The attorney looked at his notes. Nobody looked at me. Margaret then laid out the records one by one. The deed, the county parcel map, the survey, the 90-day temporary access letter, the absence of renewal, the absence of transfer, the absence of any recorded right allowing permanent signage, lighting, cameras, utilities, or a public entrance on Whitaker land. Each document landed on the table with a soft paper sound that felt louder than applause. A man in the second row stood and asked if the HOA had been collecting entrance maintenance fees for land outside the association. A woman near the aisle asked whether the insurance policy covered structures built on a private parcel. Another resident asked why Patricia had asked me to sign access cooperation documents if the HOA already had valid rights. That question froze the room. Patricia tried to answer with phrases again. Continuity, interpretation, legal review, neighborly cooperation. But the words had lost their shine. They sounded like air leaking from a tire. Margaret slid our demand across the table and explained that Brookstone could not keep treating my land like a decorative assumption. They could negotiate a proper easement, pay for what they used, remove unauthorized equipment, correct the resident notices, and account for the fees collected under that entrance budget. Or they could test their missing paperwork in court. I still had not said a word. I did not need to. My grandfather's 90-day letter was doing exactly what he had written it to do, ending a favor the moment someone mistook it for ownership. The week after that meeting, Brookstone stopped sounding like a community and started sounding like an audit. The board requested extra time. Margaret gave them 5 business days. Patricia sent one message to residents about constructive dialogue, and within an hour the comments underneath it filled with questions she could not soften. Who approved the entrance budget? Who verified the title? Who signed the camera contract? Who told homeowners the entrance was an association asset? By Tuesday, Two landscaping trucks parked near the flower beds and did nothing for 20 minutes because nobody wanted to touch the soil without written permission. By Wednesday, the weekend guard kiosk sat empty, its tinted window reflecting the red survey flags like a warning light. The camera above the stone pillar still turned with that little dry tick, but now every time I heard it, I thought about the words in my grandfather's letter. No signage, no lighting, no utilities, no public entrance. Pretty things look different when the record says they should not be there. Brookstone's attorney finally produced a packet late Thursday afternoon. No deed, no purchase agreement, no recorded easement, no renewal letter. Just old board minutes referring to the entrance as maintained common frontage, invoices for irrigation and lighting, a landscaping contract, camera service bills, and years of budget lines charged to residents under entrance operations. Margaret read it at her desk while I sat across from her, and the only sound in the room was the slow turn of paper. She looked up and said, "They documented the spending, not the right." That sentence became the hinge of everything. The next letter we sent was shorter, cleaner, and much harder to ignore. Brookstone could either remove the encroachments and restore the land, or negotiate a written easement with compensation, insurance, maintenance limits, equipment removal, fee accounting, and a public correction to residents. We did not ask them to beg. We asked them to choose reality. Patricia tried to hold one more line. She told the board, in an email someone later forwarded to Margaret, that conceding would reward old paper over modern community needs. Old paper. The same phrase again, dressed in a different suit. But this time, residents saw it. The message spread through Brookstone before sunset. By Friday morning, 3 board members had asked for an executive session without her. By Monday, the stone entrance that had once made her look powerful made her look careless. Negotiations began in Margaret's office with Brookstone's attorney, 2 board members, their insurance representative, and Patricia sitting at the far end of the table with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. I remember the smell of coffee, printer toner, and rain on the sidewalk outside. I remember the easement draft sliding across the table, thick with conditions. Annual access fee. Defined entrance footprint. No expansion without written approval. Removal of the camera pole and any equipment outside the agreed line. Insurance naming Whitaker land as covered. Reimbursement of my legal and survey costs. Written notice to residents correcting the ownership record. Patricia stared at the first page like the words had personally betrayed her. I signed nothing that day. Margaret told them we would review revisions. That was the beauty of leverage. For once, Brookstone had to wait on the landowner. The final agreement was recorded on a clear Tuesday morning, almost 3 months after I first stood under those stone pillars with my grandfather's deed in my hand. Brookstone Ridge kept its entrance, but not its illusion. The easement was narrow, written, paid, insured, and limited to the exact footprint Margaret had approved. The camera pole came down first, lifted out of the flower bed like a bad idea, finally losing its anchor. Then the contractor moved the lighting conduit back inside the agreed line, replaced the irrigation box, and removed the small signs Patricia had added over the years without permission. The bronze Brookstone Ridge sign stayed, but now every inch of ground beneath it existed because my signature allowed it, not because their confidence invented it. The annual access fee was not small. Neither was the reimbursement for my survey costs, legal fees, and the temporary use they had treated like ownership for decades. Residents received a correction notice explaining that a portion of the main entrance had been constructed on Whitaker land without a recorded permanent easement, and that the association had resolved the matter through a formal agreement. It was the driest paragraph I had ever read, and somehow one of the most satisfying. Patricia did not sign it. The new board president did. She had been removed in a special vote after that forwarded email about old paper became the phrase nobody could defend. I heard she called it a misunderstanding. Maybe that helped her sleep. I only knew that by the time the vote ended, the same room that once laughed at my survey had gone quiet enough for the clerk to count ballots in a normal voice. A week later, I parked my truck near the entrance just before sunrise. The sky was pale blue over the pines, and the asphalt still held a faint silver sheen from overnight rain. Cars rolled through slowly, headlights dimming as morning opened. Nobody honked. Nobody glared. The camera no longer ticked above me. For the first time, that entrance sounded honest. Tires on pavement, birds in the tree line, wind moving through wet grass, no machinery pretending to watch land it did not own. I walked to the edge of the right-of-way and pressed one boot into the red dirt beyond the stonework, the part still fully mine, untouched and quiet. My grandfather used to say boundaries were not rude. They were how neighbors stayed neighbors. I understood that better than ever. I never closed the gate. I never blocked the road. I never needed to make a scene. I only made them read the record. That was enough. Because the truth about land is simple. It does not care how polished your sign is, how many people drive over it, or how many times a board president calls old paper irrelevant. A deed remembers. A survey remembers. A county stamp remembers. And sometimes justice is not a locked gate. Sometimes it is a line on a map that waits patiently until the right person finally looks down. So tell me, if someone built their entire entrance on your family's land and then laughed at your proof, would you have kept it open while the truth caught up? And if stories like this remind you that quiet patience can hit harder than loud power, stay with this channel, because the next boundary line might be the one nobody thought to check.